London, grad pučana i kraljeva. U njegovu središtu nalazi se muzej koji krije mračne, neobične tajne. Tajni agenti iz Drugog svjetskog rata. Životinje u posudama s formalinom. Ukleti dragur. Londonu. Njegova fascinantna zbirka ima više od 70 milijuna izložaka. Muzej na dan razgleda nekoliko tisuća posjetitelja, no kad padne noć i hodnici opuste, čini se kao da izložbene prostorije ožive. U njima se skrivaju nevjerojatne priče o prošlosti i budućnosti planeta. Dvorane i mračni hodnici prava su poslastica za odvažne. Ako malo bolje pogledate, doznaćete mračne tajne o ljudskoj okrutnosti.
Well, we've got material from Goff's Cave in Cheddar Gorge in Somerset, and this is some of the material we dug up in the late 1980s from our excavations there in really just a small area of the cave. They're important because they represent people near the end of the last ice age in Britain, so they're the best sample we have of people from Britain at that time.
Prije 15.000 godina sjeverozapadni dio Europe bio je ledena pustoš. 13.000 godina prije Krista tlo se počelo ubrzano zagrijavati. Led se otopio s golemog dijela kopna koji je povezivao Britaniju s ostatkom europskog kontinenta. Ovamo su se iz Europe doselili nomadi.
These people arrived really quite rapidly, probably following herds of animals migrating into Britain. We think that life was quite hard for these people. When we were excavating, we obviously found not just these human remains, the remains of a number of individuals. On this skull, which is an adult skull, we can see here cut marks running across this region here. There are also marks on the frontal bone, suggesting that perhaps the skin has been removed. On this jawbone, we've got a series of cut marks here where the jaw was disarticulated from the skull. So the material has been pretty extensively worked over by humans, and obviously there are many different reasons why that might have happened. May have been an act of desperation, because of course we know cases today when there has been a crisis, people have been stranded somewhere, an aeroplane has crashed in the mountains, and people in the end are forced to eat other people.
Zar je moguće da su u Britaniji živjeli kanibali? Ako je to točno, ove kosti su dokaz da su se prastanovnici Engleske hranili ne samo životinjskim, nego i ljudskim mesom. Kako bismo riješili ovu zagonetku, posjetit ćemo klanac pokraj gradića Cheddara, gdje su paleontolozi iz Prirodoslovnog muzeja pronašli kosti.
Here we are in Goff's Cave, Cheddar in Somerset. This is now a commercial show cave. The floor level would once have been really quite high. This is the site of our excavation. Essentially, it's an area that was protected by this rock. And the crack down the back and the pit behind are where all of our finds came from. We found very large numbers of broken human bones, all jumbled up with the remains of animals like horses and red deer. And we noticed quite early on that the horses and red deer had been butchered for food and thrown away. And the human remains appear to have been treated in exactly the same way. Many of the bones that have been found here, both human bones and animal bones, have cut marks on them, and they're cut marks made by sharp flint. The animal remains were presumably being butchered so that people could eat them. And our supposition is that therefore they were eating the humans as well. People have suggested very complex ritual explanations. Archaeologists use the word ritual when they don't know what's going on.
Više od 20 godina ljudske kosti bile su pohranjene u paleontološkom odjelu Prirodoslovnog muzeja i nisu bile izložene za javnost. Znanstvenici nisu doznali podrijetlo neobičnih ureza. Uz pomoć suvremene 3D tehnike, doktorica Silvija Bello možda će uspjeti razriješiti ovu zagonetku.
Now the image is being scanned three-dimensionally, and you can notice that this series of cut marks is being reproduced by the scan image. We can turn our image and have a proper look of the cut marks according which angle we prefer. This is a clear cut mark. Here there is another one which is much shallow. These specific marks, they tell me, well, first of all, is a series of marks, one next to the other, so the movement, it was a constant sort of filleting, in this case, of the mandible. The angle, in this case, is quite acute, which means that it was not a cutting angle, but it was more of a defleshing angle in this sense. The next step would be actually to see if some tool like this one can actually produce cut marks similar to the one we have here.
Naše sljedeće odredište je gradić Cheddar. Mesar Jim Baker rastrančirat će svinjsko meso uz pomoć replika kremenog oruđa pronađenog u špilji Goff. Silvija će usporediti ureze na svinjskim kostima s onima na fosilnim ostacima ljudskih kostiju.
These are the sort of tool that were probably found in Goff's cave.
Well, I'm going to start with this one, because this looks like...
Very sharp. Are you actually using more strength in this case?
Really, at the moment, you can feel that you're right on top of the bone, and there's a scraping motion on the bone, so... whether we'll get the cartilage out.
It seems that cutting is not really a problem.
Through the meat, it's not a problem at all, no. It's lots of sharp little cutting motions. Rather than with a knife, it's a much more sweeping action, yeah. You can hear it on the bone, can't you? Yeah.
It's coming gently.
It is. It's coming in small pieces, but... And again, you see there's that...
Oh, yes, I can see the...
Yeah, you can see the top of the head of the femur.
I was surprised if there are no traces on the bone at the end.
There you go. We've got one.
First one.
That surprised me, how easy it was, actually. That.
Wow.
There we go.
Yeah. Just curious to see if there are any cuts
it would be,
left.
there's definitely cut marks down through there.
Yeah. So it would be very interesting just to see if is it exactly reproduction of what we have on fossil, which we can prove that they were using the same technique and possibly the same tool that we have here.
Svinjske kosti iz mesnice su čiste i suhe, pa će ih Silvija analizirati mikroskopom.
This is quite interesting because the location of the cut marks in here are exactly the same. So this is the one that has been butchered by the butcher.
Yeah.
And there is all this series of cut marks, almost perpendicular.
Yeah.
And you can see exactly the same orientation, the same location on the fossil of Goff's cave. There's also, you can see all the internal striation, which is the indication that is produced by a stone tool.
Yeah.
This one, you can see the same characteristic, the forking at the end. Microstriation over there and over here. So they are very similar. And the fact that it becomes one single cut, and here it also becomes one single cut.
Ljudske kosti pronađene u klancu pokraj Cheddara odrezane su na isti način kao i životinjske. Silvija je došla do nimalo lijepog zaključka.
If we're looking at animal remains,
there will be no doubt.
It'd be butchery.
For human, we can't be 100% sure it was cannibalism. But with this evidence, I am 99% sure.
Znanstvenici su došli do šokantnog otkrića o životu prastanovnika Britanije. Gotovo je posve sigurno da su jeli ljudsko meso. U Prirodoslovnom muzeju čuvaju se neobični predmeti. Među 70 milijuna izložaka najpoznatiji su oni koje je skupljao slavni prirodoslovac Charles Darwin. Njegov kip krasi glavni ulaz. Time je muzej odao priznanje znanstveniku koji je sredinom 19. stoljeća promijenio svijet svojom revolucionarnom teorijom evolucije. Danas je za javnost izložen samo djelić njegove zbirke. Većina predmeta čuva se u prostorijama kojima pristup imaju samo djelatnici muzeja. Čitave zbirke, među kojima je i bogata zoološka zbirka, posložene su na policama dugima 27 kilometara. U ovoj prostoriji nekoliko tisuća preparata pohranjeno je u posudama s alkoholom i formalinom, koje su posložene duž zidova. Ovo je jedna od najvećih zbirki ove vrste i stalno se povećava. Tradiciju koju je počeo Darwin nastavlja glavni kustos Oliver Crimen. Punih 40 godina skuplja neobične životinjske vrste, koje će biti od pomoći u budućim znanstvenim istraživanjima.
This is why we call it the tank room. The larger specimens are here in tanks. We like our Victorian glass bottles, but for some of the bigger things, it's not practical to have a glass jar.
This is Arapaima from the Amazon River.
That's a big freshwater fish.
It's good eating, I gather.
So they're endangered in the wild. This one is a particular old favourite of mine. I used to watch it swimming around in the London Zoo aquarium when I was younger. And years later I found my old friend again in a museum tank when I got a job at the museum. So I've known this fish for some years. The collection goes back hundreds of years. That means that we have Captain Cook's specimens in the collection, Charles Darwin's specimens. You can think of it as a sort of Noah's Ark in the sense that specimens here that are no longer available in the wild. One of my favourites is a deep sea relative of the anglerfish. Their mouth is full of sharp fangs, and on the head there is the fantastic luminous organ. All you would see of it is the little luminous spots, probably like a little crowd of luminous shrimps. And coming to investigate that, you would be unaware of the mouth waiting below.
Ove životinje izgledaju zastrašujuće, ali znanstvenicima su poslužile kao nadahnuće za revolucionarna otkrića.
This is the head of a basking shark. It's one of the giant sharks in the world, growing to over 30 feet long. It doesn't have much in the way of jaw teeth, so although much bigger than a great white, it's only got very small teeth. It's too big to go chasing around after big prey. So it's swimming along with its cavernous mouth open, mopping up little shrimps from the sea. The hydrodynamic trick that sharks have learned of having little teeth all over their skin has been very useful to a shark that's on the move all of its life.
Kožu morskog psa prekrivaju ljuskice nalik na zube. Voda se odbija od njih, te se na taj način smanjuje trenje pri plivanju.
Very important if you're a massive fish moving through water. Water's 800 times as dense as air, so it's hard work making a living moving forwards through water. And that's why these teeth are so important to sharks. Now, the Speedo company wanted to see if they could imitate that on an Olympic swimsuit.
Plivanje je sport u kojem vas od pobjede katkad dijeli samo nekoliko stotinki. Stoga je tvrtka Speedo primijenila inovativnu tehnologiju u izradi kupaćih kostima. Na osnovi ljuskica na koži gorastasne psine, dizajneri su osmislili Fast Skin, revolucionarni kupaći kostim nalik na kožu morskog psa. Fast Skin je prvi put predstavljen na olimpijskim igrama u Sidniju 2000. i pokazao je da je riječ o revolucionarnom dostignuću. Naime, 83% svih medalja osvojili su natjecatelji koji su nosili taj kostim.
This is a good example of the usefulness of specimens in the collection. You can't tell what they will reveal to us in the future. They are the subject matter of endless research. As time goes on, the collection becomes more valuable and more important.
Prirodoslovni muzej u Londonu san je svakog mineraloga. U njegovoj zbirci nalazi se više od 300.000 uzoraka minerala i stijena. Najvrijedniji primjerci pohranjeni su u sefu. Među njima su meteorit s Marsa, grumen zlata i jedan od najvećih nebrušenih smaragda na svijetu. Ovi predmeti imaju neprocjenjivu vrijednost. Dio ove zbirke je i dragulj koji je postao poznat ne zbog svoje ljepote, nego zato što se vjeruje da donosi nesreću. Vjerovalo se da je ljubičasti safir uklet. Ukraden je 1857. iz hrama boga Indre u vrijeme ustanka Indijaca protiv engleske vlasti. Vjeruje se da će onoga tko ga dotakne zadesiti nesreća, tuga, bijeda, pa čak i smrt. Neki još vjeruju da je safir uklet, ali mineralog Alan Hart ne slaže se s time.
Well, this is the blasted amethyst, or cursed amethyst, as is well known. It's a magnificent gemstone, beautiful amethyst crystal. This is a very large size. It's a very flat table. This is the flat area on the top, and that gives a window into the stone. But what's fantastic about this stone is that it had this great story with it.
Godine 1944. ljubičasti je safir Prirodoslovnom muzeju darovao znanstvenik Edward Heron Allen. On se jako bojao prokletstva, pa je dragulj pohranio u 7 kutija koje je stavio jednu u drugu. Priložio je i popratno pismo s upozorenjem.
We do have the actual letter here. It says here, to whomsoever shall be the future possessor of this amethyst, these lines are addressed in mourning before he or she shall assume the responsibility of owning it.
Dragulj je uklet. Umrljan je krvlju i nosi pečat srama svih onih koji su ga imali u svojim rukama. Ukraden je u pljački hrama boga Indre u Kampuru. U Englesku ga je donio pukovnik bengalske konjice Ferris. Od onoga dana, kad ga je primio u ruke, sustigle su ga nesreće. Razbolio se i ostao je bez novca. Njegov sin, kojem je dragulj pripao nakon očeve smrti, darovao ga je prijatelju. Taj je počinio samoubojstvo i oporučno mu ga ostavio. Sin pukovnika Ferrisa bio je prestravljen. Godine 1890. dragulj je darovao Heron Allenu, koji je bio pomalo ekscentričan.
Heron Allen was a very interesting gentleman. You call him a polymath. He was into absolutely everything, like Persian literature, history of the violin. I think he was just interested in everything, and that would have involved the afterlife, the occult, supernatural, and so on and so forth. And I think this is one of the reasons why the purple sapphire he took so seriously, and the possible curse.
Bio je član tajnog društva Rozenkreuzera. Vjerovao je da uz pomoć sila s drugog svijeta može razbiti prokletstvo ljubičastog safira. Od trenutka kad sam ga primio u ruke, zadesile su me nesreće. Tada sam oko njega namotao dvoglavu zmiju i stavio pločice sa znakovima zodijaka, križ, tau i 2 skarabeja od ametista iz vremena vladavine kraljice Hatshepsut, koji su doneseni iz Tebe.
So, interestingly, as a scientist and a mineralogist, I'm not sure what that means. So I find it quite interesting that the stone is mounted in the silver described such as Heron Allen has. And I'd like to know what that actually does mean. Is this designed to keep the curse into the stone?
Dvoglava zmija Nehepka, egipatski bog podzemnog svijeta koji se bori protiv zla. Tau, sveti križ starih Egipćana i prvih kršćana, priziva sunce, izvor života. Skarabeji su također simbol sunca. Ova 2 mala dragulja stara su više od 3000 godina i simboliziraju egipatskog boga sunca. Vidi se da se Heron Allen silno trudio da razbije prokletstvo, no ništa nije pomoglo. 1903. godine zadesila me još jedna velika nesreća, pa sam ga bacio u kanal. 3 mjeseca poslije vratio mi ga je trgovac umjetninama, a on ga je kupio na brodu koji vozi kanalom. Potom sam ga darovao prijateljici pjevačici jer me usrdno molila. Kad je pokušala zapjevati, ostala je bez glasa. Nedavno mi se rodila kći i osjećam da ima loš utjecaj i na nju. Stavit ću ga u 7 kutija i napisati da se ne smije otvoriti najmanje 30 godina nakon moje smrti. Onaj koji otvori kutije najprije neka pročita upozorenje, a onda može činiti što ga je volja. Ja mu savjetujem da ga baci u more.
So rather than cast it into the sea, what we've done is cast it into our mineral collection. Do I believe in a curse? Well, obviously, no, I don't believe in a curse. Also, I won't be handling it like this.
Među onima koji još vjeruju u legendu o prokletstvu jesu i članovi Heron Allenove obitelji. Unuk nekadašnjeg vlasnika, Ivor Jones, nije vidio ljubičasti safir više od 10 godina i misli da je bolje da tako i ostane.
Here we have the item itself.
Yes.
The cursed amethyst.
Blasted amethyst.
The blasted amethyst, yes. And there it is.
Yes. We don't want it back. My mother gave it to the museum.
Yes.
And it was an outright gift.
Yeah.
No strings or anything.
Yeah.
And what you did with it was up to you. My personal opinion is that we ought to find out which Hindu god it was stolen from, and it ought to be returned.
Beautiful colour, lovely amethyst gemstone.
It's a lovely thing. It would make an absolutely marvellous brooch.
Yeah.
For a girl now.
If she would be willing to wear it, of course. So, but before we put this back into the vault on display in the museum, would you like to hold it for one last time?
I won't touch it.
Right, yes, yeah, sure.
And nor any of my brothers or sisters. Call me superstitious, but I'd rather not.
Prirodoslovni muzej skriva tajne sablasnog ljubičastog safira. Izložci iz vremena Drugog svjetskog rata vraćaju nas u mračno doba ljudske povijesti, kada su odjekivale eksplozije. Nakon pada Francuske 1940. godine, nacisti su potisnuli savezničke snage iz kontinentalnog dijela Europe. No Britanci su odlučili uzvratiti udarac. Osnovana je tajna specijalna postrojba čiji je zadatak bio zapaliti Europu diverzijama u područjima koje je okupirao neprijatelj. Između ostalog, pripadnici postrojbe pripremali su se i u Prirodoslovnom muzeju. Ovdje su se tajni agenti i diverzanti opremali oružjem, eksplozivom i drugim opasnim napravama. Agent Ian Fleming proveo je neko vrijeme u muzeju. Otud nadahnuće za lik ljubitelja naprava Q-a iz romana o Jamesu Bondu.
The idea was if you were a field agent, you would be brought here to show what the SOE could supply you in terms of weapons and explosives. So basically it was sort of like a shop. There was a windmill here, a generator, and you would put the generator in a field and you could charge the batteries to your radio. We're now walking into the Marine Gallery. There was a diver standing here in diving gear, and he was the pilot of a small miniature submarine that was displayed here. And here was a workshop. It was from here that they used to make the molds of the plaster casts of the coal and the logs, and they were hollowed out, and you could hide things in them, and you would put them in your lorry, and if the Germans looked, it just looked like coal.
Posebna jedinica osmislila je neka od najučinkovitijih eksplozivnih sredstava za vrijeme Drugog svjetskog rata. Sačuvalo se samo nekoliko njih, ali zato postoje nacrti i fotografije koji će pomoći stručnjaku za eksplozive Sidneyu Alfordu da otkrije prema kojem su na čelu radila.
I'm weighing out about 200 grams of plastic explosive called EP04. I have a certain available volume, space for the explosive. I'm going to put it inside the skin of a rat was surplus to the requirements of the pharmaceutical industry, I believe. I didn't have it killed for a purpose. I like rats. I'm replicating a particular type of what nowadays would be described as an improvised explosive device, a bomb, for the purpose of sabotage in German-occupied countries during the Second World War. It was to be used particularly by Special Operations Executive. I'll just trim the cottons, lest a very observant furnaceman say, hey, that's been stitched up. I don't think if you were in charge of stoking a furnace, you would notice that this chap has got insides that he wasn't born with. We've made here a representation of a boiler. The essential is that it has a furnace as part of it. It is quite substantial. It's made in steel. Here we have a plain detonator with safety fuse coming out of it. I have wrapped the safety fuse with PVC tape and with aluminium foil to protect it from the flames, because I don't want it to ignite prematurely. I want to get a safe distance away. And I do believe that that detonator is now inside the body of explosive. And the concept was that these would be dispersed here and there, wherever there was a boiler. These would be thrown in the piles of coal in those countries occupied by the Germans. When the stoker comes along, he would not like the rat to be lying around his place of work, so he'd pick it up by its tail or on a shovel and throw it in the fire, and no doubt then add some more coal. Wow. Well, it certainly did the job. I can understand why anyone who's done the experiment will be scared of rats lying around boiler houses.
Improvizirana eksplozivna sredstva izazvala su pravi kaos u okupiranoj Europi. Neka od njih došla su u ruke njemačkih časnika koji su planirali atentat na Hitlera.
For the attempted assassination of Hitler, they decided they would try to insinuate onto his aircraft some of these Type C bombs. And it contains the explosive, which was a mixture of TNT and tetrol. The purpose of this is to insert means of initiation, which in this case was intended to be a time pencil.
Ta se vrsta upaljača aktivira pomoću kiseline. Kada se zareže bakrena žica, počne se ispuštati kiselina. Ona polako izjeda žicu koja oprugu drži zategnuto. To izaziva otpuštanje opruge, pa igla udara u upaljač i tako nastaje eksplozija.
Now somebody had a bright idea that if you take a pair of these, and I made some mock-ups for the purpose and put them together, they have very approximately the same dimensions to a bottle of the French liqueur, Cointreau, which was no doubt quite a luxury in Germany during the war. I like it myself.
U ožujku 1943. Hitler je posjetio istočni front. U Njemačku se trebao vratiti avionom. Urotnicima se pružila prilika za napad. Postavili su detonator, a kutija je izgledala kao da su u nju zapakirane 2 boce Cointreau. Na uzletištu je jedan od urotnika pritisnuo paket s vanjske strane, a pritom se bočica s otrovom razbila. Paket je dao Hitlerovu pomoćniku i rekao da je to dar za vođu. Bomba je trebala eksplodirati za 30 minuta. Hitlerov zrakoplov je uzletio poslijepodne.
Here we have a representation of the bomb and of historic interest. What I'm going to use is an equivalent amount of explosive. This is just cartridges of standard plastic explosive to British military P4. Given a little more time, I might have been able to arrange a suitable plane to blow up, but we're using this van, which after all is well constructed and in steel, as a pretty good equivalent to an aeroplane. When you see the effect on the van, I don't think you'll quibble. I'm now going to put the detonator into the explosive. The original idea was that it would be placed in this, I'm sure, expensive and beautifully wrapped presentation box, more or less in the middle of the vehicle. Three, two, one. The effect was a bit more than I had expected, I must admit. There's a panel over there. Seems to have reduced it to its large sheet metal components. There's the top, which came off in a way which I actually predicted, I must say. It's inevitable that it would have blasted a hole where I put the charge, and imagine that that were an airplane. There will be the floor of the airplane, of the fuselage, flying through the air pretty well by itself. It could not conceivably remain aerodynamic. It is absolutely obvious that an airplane could not have survived it. The question arises, therefore, why didn't the bomb go off?
Nakon nešto manje od 2 sata, Hitler je sigurno sletio na odredište. Neki povjesničari smatraju da bomba nije eksplodirala zbog neispravnog upaljača ili zbog niske temperature. Sidney Alford misli da postoji drugi razlog zbog kojeg urotnik koji je zapakirao bombu nije promijenio tijek povijesti.
I rather suspect, but he forgot. I would guess that was a safety device and you had to remove it before the thing could work. He must have been in rather nervous condition when he was getting ready this bomb to prepare Hitler. The consequences of his being caught in the act would have been horrendous for him. If he had not made that mistake, what the implications on history would have been. Hitler dead in 1943. Think about that.
U veličanstvenom prirodoslovnom muzeju izložci pričaju nevjerojatne priče iz prošlosti. U njemu se čuva jedna od najvećih zbirki kostura sisavaca u svijetu. Među njima su i vrste koje su doživjele okrutnu sudbinu, mučene su i istrijebljene.
These are 2 skulls that were excavated from the moat at the Tower of London back in 1937. They were actually examined by my predecessors who made the identification that these 2 specimens were actually lions. Some of the more distinctive areas on the skull which really tell you that these are lions, things like the huge nasal passages. And this huge arch actually is an aperture through which the enormous jaw muscle passes. And of course, in combination with those ferocious-looking canines, we know that these things have got a heck of a bite. The 2 skulls were found to be Barbary lion. And for the Natural History Museum, of course, that was very, very exciting because up to that point, we didn't have any identified specimens of Barbary lion in the collection. This specimen, which looks like the more recent of the 2, was in fact the oldest specimen. Now, the carbon date range that came back for this one was late 13th, early 14th century. They're the first 2 lion skulls to be discovered in England since the end of the last ice age.
Postavlja se pitanje odakle u londonskom Toweru lavlje kosti iz Maroka. U tom će nam pomoći kosti drugih životinja koje su također pronađene u opkopu.
But apart from the lions, we have these wonderful examples here of dog skulls found in the moat. So this one in particular is of great interest to us because you can actually see on the left-hand side a puncture wound to the cranium. What we assume has happened here is that this specimen, this dog, has been involved possibly in bear baiting, and that this is a fatal canine puncture wound. It speaks volumes, I think, for what was going on in the tower.
Londonski Tower bio je zloglasni zatvor u kojem su engleski kraljevi mučili i ubijali izdajnike. No ovdje nisu bili utamničeni samo ljudi, nego i životinje.
This is the main western entrance to the Tower of London, and this is where the Royal Menagerie was from the 13th century right up until the 19th century. And Here, lots of exotic animals were kept, and we can see the drawbridge you would have crossed to come in. You would have had to walk through a tower which isn't there any longer. The gate was originally built as a defensive structure, as a barbican, but it was very quickly known as the Lion Tower because this is where the lions were kept. Lions were kept consistently at the Tower of London because they were part of the royal coat of arms. They were the living representation of the monarchy. And you can imagine approaching this amazing, very impressive, very threatening castle. You've got the lions roaring at you. It really is the royal presence, if you like. There would have been a huge range of animals in the menagerie. There was an African elephant, which was a gift from the King of France. The Hudson Bay Company give the Tower of London a grizzly bear. Initially, the animals are here really as status symbols. But by the 17th century, it's officially an area that's being used for lion baiting. They've got dogs and bears and different animal fighting, really, that people are betting on. The King James, is very keen on this and has a special platform constructed, so it's kind of like an auditorium and people can come and watch.
Kraljevske menažerije više nije bilo. 30. godina 20. stoljeća arheolozi su tijekom iskapanja u opkopu tvrđave došli do senzacionalnog otkrića.
What they found, which they weren't expecting, were these lion skulls and also dog skulls. But the lion skulls are extraordinary because they have been dated to the medieval period, and they're also, as I understand it, a breed of lion which is now extinct.
Postoji mogućnost da ova vrsta lava uopće nije izumrla. Znanstvenici bi to mogli dokazati uz pomoć lubanja lavova koje se čuvaju u muzeju. Dr. Simon Black smatra da su potomci berberskog lava i dalje živi, i to u zoološkim vrtovima diljem svijeta.
Here we have the Moroccan royal lion, which is the animals descended from the royal pest collection of the King of Morocco. And he obtained these originally from the wild in North Africa. And what's particularly interesting about these animals is some of the differences you see compared to lions you might see in sub-Saharan Africa. So he's got a very, very pointed crown tip at the top of his head and a very straight line down to the tip of his nose, which gives this very regal sort of look. But one of the most noticeable features is this lovely mane that goes round his head, round his body and down under his belly. And then if you look at his eyes, you've got very pale eyes. And this appears to be a characteristic of Barbary lions and seems to be consistently found in animals that are from the Moroccan king's collection. We believe that as they've been kept in captivity, it's offered us a chance maybe to rediscover Barbary lion, or lions that at least have some of that ancestry in them. And this is where these guys come in.
Znanstvenici će uzeti uzorke DNK od lavova diljem planeta i usporediti ih s DNK lavova marokanskog kralja.
And when we compare the Moroccan royal lion with a lion from southern Africa, we see that most of these pairs match up. But as we go through, we find areas such as here where there is a mismatch. And if we compare again with another set of lions, this one from Ethiopia, again, going across a lot of commonality between all three lion populations. But then differences are starting to appear as we go across this small sequence. So far, with the few tools and data that we do have available, we are starting to find that there are tantalizing differences between the Moroccan royal lions and lions from other populations.
Moguće je da ovi lavovi čine posebnu vrstu i da nisu u rodu s drugim lavovima. No ostaje pitanje jesu li oni doista potomci berberskog lava.
There's a pool of data there from the bones of those museum specimens that can tell us a little bit about this jigsaw of DNA, what it looks like in Barbary lions. And we can go back, check that DNA data, and then match it with the Moroccan royal lion and say, is there a good match? If these animals are shown to be authentic, then effectively you are resurrecting an animal that so far has been considered extinct.
and we'll be showing evidence that there's a subspecies of lion which we haven't been able to talk about for best part of 100 years.
Kako bi riješili ovu zagonetku, znanstvenici će trebati provesti dodatna istraživanja. U svakom slučaju, lubanje stare 700 godina mogli bi im pomoći da pronađu životinjsku vrstu za koju se smatra da je izumrla. Možda će se jednog dana berberski lav ponovno vratiti u divljinu. Kad skrenete iza ugla i krenete dalje hodnikom, pred vama će se pojaviti tajanstvena životinja. Takav kostur nađe se rijetko gdje u svijetu. Ova je ptica izumrla prije više od 300 godina. Ptica dodo najpoznatiji je primjerak izumrle životinjske vrste čiji je nestanak uzrokovan dolaskom čovjeka. Obično se kaže da je majka priroda nije baš mazila. Smatra se da je dodo bila slaba, lijena i debela ptica. No, znanstvenici iz Prirodoslovnog muzeja misle da je to posve pogrešna slika. Kako bi to dokazali, analizirat će njezine kosti.
Well, this is a thin section. It's a slice through the thigh bone of the dodo, and it's been cut and ground down to about 30 to 50 thousandths of a millimetre thick. It's thin enough to let light go through it. This area here in yellow is an area of bone fibres that are running in a circular fashion around the diameter of the bone. And that is a characteristic of fast-growing bone. And this shows us that the dodo was able to grow from a chick to an adult without any interruptions in its growth. So this does tell us something about the ecology of Mauritius before humans arrived.
Ptica dodo živjela je na Mauriciusu, vulkanskom otoku u Indijskom oceanu. Nalikovala je na velikog goluba. Na ovaj mali otok doselila se prije nekoliko milijuna godina. Ondje je bio pravi raj. Hrane je bilo u izobilju, a ni jednog grabežljivca. Dr. Julian Hume svjetski je poznat stručnjak za ovu vrstu. Već godinama proučava pticu dodo, nastojeći otkriti kako je živjela.
The myth that the dodo was an inadequate species doomed to extinction, fat, vulnerable, is totally wrong. This bird was perfectly fine-tuned. It wasn't this slow, waddling thing that wandered about its island home. It was actually a very active species. It actually took the equivalent of a large mammal, so it became a cow, if you like, of the Mauritian forests. It would have eaten the fruits on the ground, and everything about the bird's ecology evolved to being on the ground. And that's a key thing in why the dodo became flightless. It's very expensive in terms of energy for a bird to fly, and nature always works in a conservative way. If you don't need those energy sources, get rid of them. The breast muscles, the muscles that produce flight, are attached here to a bone called the sternum, and this usually has a big keel on it of which those muscles are attached. Well, the dodo didn't need them, and so the keel has disappeared, and the muscles would have become very small. And as you can see from the wings just here, how small those wings are compared with the rest of the bird. Being perfectly adapted to its Mauritian home, there's a price to pay. If it was left alone, the dodos would still be happily walking around Mauritius right to this present day.
U 17. stoljeću na otok su stigli Europljani. Ova je ptica bila dobrodušna i nije se bojala ljudi, što su oni protumačili pogrešno. Prozvali su je dodo, što na portugalskom znači lud, odnosno glup, i tako je ostalo do dana današnjeg. Europljani su na otok doveli druge životinje. Štakori, psi i svinje uništavali su gnijezda ptice dodo zbog jaja.
The dodo had evolved in perfect harmony with its forest home for millions of years. Suddenly, with all this onslaught of introduced animals, and it could not cope. So after that first mention of dodos in 1599, just 80 years later, it was gone from this world. It was totally extinct. And what can we learn from that? Well, here we are as human beings on this planet, thinking we're above nature, and we are probably just as vulnerable in the long run if dramatic changes take place on this planet. And we may well indeed follow the way of the dodo if we're not careful.
Svaki kostur, svaki primjerak životinjske vrste, svaki skriveni kutak ovog muzeja ima neku svoju priču. Neke od njih smo doznali, ali ostalo ih je još jako mnogo, s obzirom na to da se u Prirodoslovnom muzeju čuva nekoliko milijuna izložaka. Ako malo bolje pogledate, tko zna kakve će sve tajne izaći na vidjelo.